Welcome to my home office, which since last June 30th when I retired is now functioning as my home office, but more importantly, the repository of my baseball stadiums, or my baseball stadium museum, if you will. Not everyone is totally turned on by stadiums. I happen to be one of those lucky souls who have been for the last 71 years. I attended my first game in August of 1949, and I was 7 years of age at the time at Griffith Stadium in Washington, D.C. And if I can get my cinematographer to go in on the stadium, there is Griffith Stadium, built in 1911, torn down in 1961. Interestingly, you can see that outside the center field fence, there are 5 row houses. And the owner of those row houses would not tear them down or would not sell them to Clark Griffith, so he built the stadium around the row houses. One other really interesting thing about Griffith Stadium is had a very long left field fence and bleachers in left field, and Mickey Mantle in 1952 hit a 565-foot home run out of the stadium over the left center field fence. Griffith Stadium was torn down, and Howard University Hospital sits now where Griffith Stadium was. I point that out as the first one I attended, but when my heart really was stolen was the following summer in 1950 when I attended Connie Mack Stadium, which was then called Shibe Park in Philadelphia. Here's a model of Shibe Park. As you can see, it all sat in one city block, 21st and Lehigh Avenue in Philadelphia. And up here is a painting of it that I bought at the All-Star game when it was at Camden Yards about 10 years ago or so. I saw that painting and thought I had to have it, and that's the original Shibe Park, built in 1909, torn down in 1970. I have found, with regard to stadiums, that when you attend a ball game, you either have it or you don't. When you walk out of the tunnel and you look at that expanse of green, it's like a gigantic pearl out there. People have written poems about that. I'm not a person who has any talent at writing poems, or I would have, because I get the feel, and you have the feel. So, in the United States, in United States baseball history, there were 3 distinct periods of stadium construction, and we're going to hit all 3 of those periods. The old classics, which were built beginning around 1908, 1909, and through the teens, and most of them lasted about a half century. 2 of them are still in existence, and we'll talk about them later. In the middle part of the century, you had the old stadiums falling down, and you had the new construction, and I call that the cookie-cutter, quasi-modern type stadium. And a lot of them were built in the 60s and 70s, and we'll show you them. And then you came, beginning in 1992, with Camden Yards, and you had the retro classics, and that's what's been built for the last 30 years. So Marge, if you will come over here and pan across these stadiums right here, what we're looking at now are the old classics. There were a dozen of these built around 1910, between 1910 and 1915. Most of them have been torn down. Interestingly enough, this one on the end is Forbes Field in Pittsburgh. That was built in 3 months, between March and June of 1911. That's kind of interesting, at a cost of $280,000 or something along those lines. Marge, go back over here. These 2 right here beside each other, they are the 2 National League stadiums in New York. On the left is the Polo Grounds, and you can see why that's called the Polo Grounds. It actually was a ground where they played polo, and then they built the grandstand around it. And beside the Polo Grounds is Ebbets Field in Brooklyn, where the Dodgers played. Both of those stadiums were used through the 1956 season, and between the 56 and 57 season, the owners of the Giants and the Dodgers, 2 fellows named Horace Stoneham and Walter O'Malley, got wonderful deals to move to California. The Dodgers moved to Los Angeles, and the Giants moved to San Francisco, and New York did not have a National League team for 6 years until the Mets started in 1962. So these are your classics. These are the stadiums that were built in the early part of the century, served their purposes very, very well in virtually every major league city, and then most of these were torn down as we got into the middle part of the century. Okay, now let's go to another part of the room. This section along here is not a really honored section. If you look at the left, you'll see the first three are called the cookie cutter stadiums, and the reason they're called cookie cutters is because that's what they look like. They look like they were cut out of the same mold. They were built in Philadelphia, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati. I don't have Cincinnati. I have Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and St. Louis. I was never to the one in Cincinnati. Beside them is the somewhat deplorable RFK Stadium in Washington. That is what was built in 1961. Maybe it was the first of the cookie cutters. I mean, it wasn't suitable really for baseball. Football was played there, as it was in all the cookie cutters. They played football and baseball. Most of them had artificial turf. They were just terrible venues for baseball, and people made fun of them for about 10 or 15 years. And then you went into the period, the quasi-modern period. We get into the 70s, and you can see these stadiums were built a little differently. They look different than the cookie cutters. They have a little bit of personality, but there are a lot of these. I mean, they're in Kansas City. They're in they're in Texas. They're Dodger Stadium, which was the first of these. Atlanta. There are a number of them. And they were built in the 70s to sort of succeed the cookie cutters and do something a little different, but they didn't really, have it really done perfectly. So we come now to the retro classics, and that is in 1992, and that's Camden Yards. Now, I show you Camden Yards. I'm also going to show you something else. Let me grab this margin. The Chicago White Sox moved out of Comiskey Park, their old 70-year-old field, in 1990 and built a new stadium. They had a chance to do it right, and they didn't. They got the wrong architect. So this is called now U.S. Cellular Field, and you can look at that. That was built in 1991, and you put Camden Yards beside that in 1992, and you can see that this style is gone and this one is in, and this one's going to be in, certainly for the next 30 years or so. So here's Camden with the warehouse. It's homey, it's close, everything's together. Those of you who were around will remember that Camden Yards succeeded Memorial Stadium. Now, Memorial Stadium was used from the time that the Colts got to Baltimore in 53. The Orioles used it in 54. It was used for football and baseball until the Colts left in 1983, and then it was used until through the 91 season, and the Orioles moved to Camden Yards. We said the old classics. There are a couple of the stadiums that were built in the early part of the century that are still in existence. And this is Wrigley Field. This is the classic, iconic Wrigley Field. It's in the north side of Chicago. You'll notice that there are no lights on this model. Now, that's not a mistake by the model maker. Wrigley Field had no lights until 1988. They played all day games there. They still try to play a lot of day games there. The L runs right along here. You can ride out from downtown, hop right off here, and be at the stadium. Now has lights, but still is where it's always been and probably will be for the foreseeable future. The other classic is Fenway Park, built in 1911 in Boston. Still sitting on the same location. Notice only one, not two decks of seats, only one deck with some rows of seats on top of it. This is the classic Green Monster, the left field wall. There are now seats up on top of there too. So they've tried to modernize it a bit. The main highway runs right along back here. You hop right off and you're at the stadium. So right now we're in the classic retro mode. Any new stadiums that are being built are still being built along the same lines as Camden Yards. So Camden Yards was the start. It's lasted 30 years so far. These models were built by a company called the Danbury Mint in Connecticut. And the way I got into this, I saw their ads and I thought, geez, I'd actually been to 34 big league stadiums. So I thought I'm going to try and get as many as I can, the models of them. I haven't gotten in there. About 8 I don't have because they stopped doing this about 10 years ago or so. I don't know why. This was a great deal for my kids. These models cost about $120. What a great idea. You know, what do you get Dad for Father's Day and birthday and Christmas? Nobody ever knows what to do, so you get a necktie or something. This way the 3 kids would split the cost of one of these models, so it was $40 each. They didn't have to worry about what to get Dad for Father's Day. Along those lines, since we're talking about the Danbury Mint, this has nothing to do with stadiums. However, I did want to show you this car. This is a 1949 Ford convertible, and the Danbury Mint does this. I mean, they're really good. I mean, they actually have the spare tire and the trunk and everything. Is really kind of interesting. I saw this on one of their ads. This was my exact first car, except for the pink seats. It didn't have pink seats, but it was a 49 Ford convertible. Interestingly enough, this model cost $125. When I bought the car, it cost $150. That's not right. It cost $200. So the model was $125, car was $200. I borrowed the $200 from my dad. I paid it back over the next summer, $25 a week. I worked for a plumber laying pipe, and I was digging ditches for a school that was being built. And at the end of the week, my paycheck, it wasn't a check, it was a pay envelope, and it was $37.50. And when I would get home on Friday afternoon, he was there to extract his $25 from my pay envelope. So I had to make $12.50 go a long way the summer between my junior and senior years in high school, which was the summer of 1958. So the Danbury Mint does wonderful things. Why they stopped these stadiums, I don't know. But it has been a lifetime interest of mine. Hopefully this was I missed one thing, Marge.
I know.
You let me miss one thing.
I know.
Come on over here. In the modern stadium era, the 3 domed stadiums, if you will, the 3 stadiums that have roofs, Seattle, Milwaukee, and Arizona. They all have roofs for very good reasons. It rains a lot in Seattle, it's cold in Milwaukee, and it's hot in Arizona. So these function well. They're sort of in a class by themselves. They don't really fit in with any of the others, but they work. And when the roofs are open, they're really nice. And you can see they're built like the new classic retros on the inside, but they do have the roofs. So thank you for visiting. I hope that you learned something about stadiums. If you have any questions, I'm always happy to answer them. And thank you to my cinematographer for doing such a wonderful job.
You're welcome.
Okay, goodbye.